Hey everyone, it's Simi Shah, and welcome to Trailblazers. On this podcast, I dive deep into the journeys of trailblazing South Asians, sharing the stories of the leaders and dreamers lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Welcome back, Trailblazers. Before I get to today's episode, here's a quick message from our partner this season, McKinsey & Company.
Find out about the biggest ideas in business on McKinsey's Insights app, where you can listen to podcasts like our flagship show, The McKinsey Podcast.
We're so not tuned in to the dynamic going on for the current employees, what matters to them most.
Or watch our Author Talk series featuring law professor Dorothy A. Brown.
60% of Black college students don't graduate. And when I came across that statistic, I got so depressed.
And read lots of articles within our many newsletters like Mind the Gap, which offers insight about Gen Z. To hear, see, and read more, download McKinsey's Insights app now.
I'm so thrilled to welcome a dear friend, mentor, and inspiration in the social impact space, Megha Desai, president of the Desai Foundation. The Desai Foundation, initially established by her father over 25 years ago, is a public foundation that has impacted more than 5 million people around the world. They empower women and children through community programming that elevates health, livelihood, and menstrual health, both in the US and in India. Megha previously founded MSD, a marketing shop for emerging impact brands after a formative career in the advertising industry. She served clients around the world during her time at top advertising agencies like BBH, Wieden and Kennedy, and Ogilvy. Today, Megha sits on the advisory boards of many startups and nonprofits. She contributes to news outlets like the Boston Globe and Huffington Post, and is also an avid singer as a member of the Resistance Revival Chorus, a collective of more than 60 women that has performed at Carnegie Hall and the Lincoln Center. I'm so excited to chat with Megha today about the Desai Foundation and her journey to the social sector. Welcome, Megha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here, Simi.
So I want to start at the beginning of your journey because it's absolutely fascinating. You graduated from Barnard and then went on to start a career in corporate advertising and marketing. And obviously, we've seen a lot of people take this path from the corporate space to the nonprofit space. But I'm curious, what specifically led you to the advertising and marketing space?
Yeah, I totally get it. I was interested in people in high school. And so my thought process was there are two things that motivate people: money and God. And so that's my kind of insulated high school brain. It was like, those seem to be the two most impactful things when it comes to convincing people of things. And so I kind of explored both. And it's why I was and continue to be interested in religion as an academic practice, not as I'm religious, but I'm not super religious, but it's more of an academic practice. And then also around storytelling and marketing. I used to watch people at the grocery store take time turning over different orange juices, reading the ingredients, deciding whether they're buying brand A, B, or C. But then they need no evidence at all of God and all of the things that then come with what they believe. And to me, that dichotomy, I know sounds really naive and simplistic, but I was young. And that was to me just this really interesting and complicated duality that I wanted to explore. And for me, that channel and that avenue was marketing and advertising. And so I went into corporate advertising, hoping to storytell and learn what motivated people.
Yeah, super interesting because I've actually found storytelling to be a through line with a lot of our guests, but in very different ways. Like with you, with advertising, clearly, I remember Cal Penn talked about it in his passion for acting and the film space. So it's interesting how stories just compel us as human beings.
Yeah. Well, it's stories that have created society, right? Storytelling is at the core of everything we do, whether it's finance, medicine, religion, everything.
Absolutely. So you worked at some of these top advertising agencies. Can you speak to the experiences you had in the space and also key takeaways being in this field?
Yeah. My time at Ogilvy and Wieden and BBH most formatively were really professionally, from a development perspective, the best years of my life. I worked with the smartest people I could have asked for, worked on campaigns and clients that were so interesting, way outside of things that I understood or knew about. I loved the layered component of working at an agency where you have your core team and then you have your client and then you have potentially other partners outside of that you have to synergize with and work with. It made me a fastidious organizer and communicator in terms of all the different parties involved to get to this one goal. And I loved it. I loved working in advertising. I thought it was long hours and a lot of opportunities that I never really understood in a corporate setting. So I felt really creative all the time, despite the fact that I was on the account and strategy side, despite the fact that I wasn't in a traditionally creative job. And so that really got me excited. I loved that aspect of the job. I do still think that the industry is an incredible training ground for young people that are interested in learning about a variety of different industries. Every client that you take on, you learn and you immerse yourself in that world. So I know so much about CPG and so much about paper towels and so much about healthcare and so much about socks and all the other clients that I had. And it's just really fun to immerse yourself in these worlds. And it keeps it fresh because every couple of years you get to dive into a new industry.
Super interesting. Now, you've spoken about this before and how there comes a turning point. I'd like to think of this as your first major pivot where you start thinking about the industry at large and you actually go on to launch your own venture, MSD. Can you share a little bit about the decision to make that pivot, some of the drivers, and then I'd love to spend some time talking about MSD.
Yeah. So, like I said, I really enjoyed my time in the industry. I think that there were two things that never quite fit with me, that I filled up with a lot of just, I'll just work harder and I'll just move from agency to agency because maybe it's the agency fit that's not fitting, or maybe it's the client that's not fitting. Although I did spend 6 years at BBH and that was my most pivotal and developmental time I had. But the two things that I struggled with, one was, especially in the early noughts, right after 9/11, being the only person of color in a room and not always being the only woman in a room, but weirdly enough, on a lot of my accounts, I was the only woman in the room and definitely the only person of color in a room. And it's these little death by a thousand paper cuts thing. It's not like anyone was overtly racist to me, but it's like, why didn't anyone ask me why I take a separate cab to the airport when we fly every Wednesday? Because I had to get to the airport an hour and a half early because I was going to be security checked and double checked. And I didn't want to make my white colleagues uncomfortable. And so I would always take a separate cab. So it was these tiny little things. Why didn't anyone ever ask me, why aren't you traveling with us? And so I could give you 1,000 examples like that. That community, that diversity, and that being seen is so critically important because it doesn't all hit you at once. It all kind of adds up cumulatively. When one day you look down and it's a wound, it's not just a small little cut. And I'm so happy to see that the industry has very much progressed in the last 20 years and is much more diverse and whatnot. The second, and this is a really personal experience, I don't think that everyone has this experience, but for me, in the roles that I was in, every time I got promoted, I felt like the brand or the thing that I was selling became more and more frivolous. And so here I was, here's the promotion, here's the big thing, here's the big fancy name brand. And I was like, am I really spending 90-hour weeks selling bubbly water? Am I really spending 90-hour weeks selling deodorant? And it just kind of got to the point where I was like, gosh, this doesn't feel like it's lining up with me in my core. And so when I started MSD, I named it Marketing Strategy Dharma because I was in pursuit of some Dharma, right? I really was trying to create an opportunity and open a door into working with brands that were selling more than just soda water. And so we worked with small companies, startups, nonprofits, and then we even worked with some large corporates that were trying to tell a more impactful story. And so that was a really interesting pivot for me. I will tell you, from an ego perspective, going from working at these marquee agencies and losing that armor of identity, man, that was difficult. And I really want to emphasize that I see how hard a transition like that is. And there were moments I handled it well, and there were moments that I did not handle it well, especially when you feel like you wore that as a badge of honor, your job, your identity.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing that because I see that as a point of tension for a lot of people my age who took that big fancy role right out of college and they want to pivot into something that aligns more with their values, as you're saying you wanted to do, but struggle with losing that brand that they've now associated and identified themselves with for so long. And understandably, it comes with its perks. So I appreciate you saying that. I'd be curious to hear what other challenges you faced with respect to going out and launching your own venture? And what were the things that really kept you going in the work that you were doing at MSD?
Yeah, I loved the work, but I was really bad at new business and pretty miserable at securing new business just because, again, it's that shift of the ego, right? When I was out in the world representing a BBH or a Wieden and Kennedy, I was wearing their laurels and selling that. And that was easier to me than me going into a room and saying, well, I'm the right person for this job. And there's a lot of me that's kind of like, anybody can do this work. It's not that hard. And so I sometimes wouldn't believe myself when I'd be sitting in a room saying, I'm the person for this job. And so that took a lot of practice and a lot of time and a lot of humility of basically being able to say, look, I'm not the only person that can do this job, but I think I'm the right person because I understand your vision. And that shift for me was really important, but I will be the first to acknowledge that I was not good at new business. Initially, it was really difficult to go from having all that infrastructure to being on your own. And especially when you get to the heights that I was at from a corporate perspective, suddenly I forgot how to design PowerPoints. There were all sorts of things where I had to relearn some of the skills that I had perfected in the first 10 years of my career. So that was interesting, oiling the wheels again. But overall, the experience was humbling, was exciting, and it made me learn so much about myself and about the people around me. It was very interesting to see the people that were willing to say oh, Megha, you're doing this completely wrong, and sit me down and show me the ropes and uplift me and hold me. And the people that were kind of oh, let's see if she figures this out on her own. And so that was really interesting to me to have that lesson of the people around me.
So you spend this time launching MSD, and then through a series of events, the Desai Foundation actually becomes one of your clients. Can you talk about how that came to be and what the actual project was?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the history of the Desai Foundation. So the Desai Foundation is 25 years old this year. It started as a family foundation. Parents started the organization really with the intention of giving back to the communities that had given so much to them. And because my father is an entrepreneur and suddenly I found myself as an entrepreneur, we are the types of folks that don't really know how to do things passively. So when we were writing checks to organizations, we would go in and get our hands dirty and say, oh, how are you guys doing this? And how are you doing that? And suddenly we found ourselves really involved in the organizations that we were writing checks to and having them work together. And so if there was a vocational training program in one village and another one, we would make them work together and say, how do we make this program more efficient? And I guess in kind of startup speak, what we were doing was building our MVPs, right? We were building our most viable products across a 10, 12-year period of time. And once we started to build those, we realized, okay, we are a really small organization. We feel like we have scalable models now that we've built and organized on our own with the support of the communities and our team. What is the right next step here? And for us, the right next step was to scale, which is what most entrepreneurs say. So we basically tried to figure out, well, what does that look like? How does that work? The honest truth is we had two entrepreneurs running this organization. We really didn't know how to do this. And so my father, Samir, came to me and said, listen, can you help us figure out how we convert from a private family foundation to a public one? And that was the assignment. It was about creating a brand identity and rewriting the mission, further focusing what we wanted our impact to be, et cetera, et cetera. And in the process, figure out what that legal process was to switch from a private family foundation to a public one. And I had always been kind of passively involved in the Desai Foundation as they were building these MVPs, visiting, having conversations with my father and with some of the other team members. But I would never pretend to claim that I was involved in building these original MVPs. And when I started to get involved with the organization, as I was building out the branding and the work and visiting the centers and learning more, I just fell in love with it. And I couldn't believe the way we were able to change these people's lives, the way that we were able to make an impact. And so I got to be honest, joining the Desai Foundation full time was not actually the goal. I thought, okay, I'll be a really active board member and this is what we'll do. As we were looking for an executive director, this is back in 7-8 years ago when the social impact space didn't quite have the cachet that it has today. So we were interviewing highly qualified folks that had worked for decades in the nonprofit sector. And they were all really qualified, but they didn't have these two qualities that we were looking for. We were looking for people that really wanted to move fast and break stuff and build quickly, iterate really fast, make mistakes, and then just keep iterating. Not people that were going to sit and do a 20-year study before they did their first thing in field. And second, somebody that was willing to say they made a mistake and just say like, oh yeah, we screwed that up or that didn't work. Let's try it another way. But then somebody that also deeply understood the work. So it was this dichotomy of this entrepreneurial spirit with the knowledge base of the work. And the board that we had assembled basically said, well, isn't that you? And it genuinely had not occurred to me. And I was like, well, is it? I was like, well, okay, I'll do this for 1 year for you guys, 1 year. So you guys can find the right person for this role. And well, that was 7 years ago.
I love that. So I'm curious, did this process of finding an executive director dovetail with your larger assignment of taking the foundation public? I'm curious as to the timing and also decision-making process there.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that it was one moment. It was more of a slow realization of the inevitable. And so most people around me knew it before I did. I needed to get there in my own time because, again, ego is an interesting thing, right? After this entire career in advertising, after this entire time building my own agency, I'm going to go work for my dad. It just felt like I was giving up or I was failing at something when actually it was literally the opposite. My father was the only person on the board that did not vote for me because he did not want it to seem like it was nepotism. Of course it was, let's be real. But he basically was like, I want you to go pursue whatever you want to do. I don't want you to sit here and resent that you are in this position. And I spent the next year proving to him and to the board, and most importantly, to the people I serve, that I was cut out for this job. And it was amazing to earn the position and to really spend so much time studying, learning, and never taking my seat for granted. The transition was slow and the transition was surprising.
Wow. So you obviously make this big pivot. You've been in the advertising space. You built your own firm at this point. What was it like making the transition to this organization? Can you speak a little bit to your day-to-day in that first year and beyond?
Yeah. When you are running a nonprofit, and I think this kind of goes for everyone running a nonprofit, there are so many things that need to be solved in this world that focus is your best friend and your greatest enemy. It is critical that you are constantly editing and constantly saying no. And the sheer number of program ideas that come from the field to us about like, what if we do this? What if we do that? What if we do this? Now, when we say no, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It means that we need to stay focused in order for us to be excellent at what we do. And so that was a huge shift because in the corporate world, and even when you're working with clients, it's usually the other people that are saying no. And you're the one that's trying to push forward ideas. So for me, that was actually a pretty big shift where I was like, oh, whoa, I'm the person that's to pump the brakes. So that was one big shift for me. The other shift in terms of the job and from an industry perspective was just from a sad perspective was the lack of innovation. I feel like in advertising, there are constantly rebuilding how advertising works, right? Whether it's technology or platforms, et cetera, how they're connecting with their customers. But the lack of innovation on the nonprofit end was really palatable to me. And I remember at first thinking, oh, I'm not literate in all the different areas of the nonprofit world. But it turned out I was. And I was sad by that. I was kind of like, wait a minute, what do you mean I already know how to do this? So there were certain things that I was kind of like, all right, there's an opportunity here for us to really break the mold. And it's why I'm very outspoken about making sure that people know that, hey, there's a different way. You don't have to do it that way. You can try it a different way. Not saying that I have all the answers, but try to do things a different way. So that was another shock. And I think the last one for me was around the deeper connection I had to get up and work every day. I have never been motivated by anything more in my life than serving the people I serve. I used to think it was the glitz and glory of having a commercial on a playoff game or something like that. But now I'm humbled every day by serving the people I do. I work way longer hours now than I ever have. Ironically, the more senior I've gotten, I somehow continue to work the long hours. I'm probably relentless in my pursuit of what I'm trying to do, which I know that some people can get annoyed with, but it is just because I have never cared about something the way that I care about the work. And that has completely transitioned and flipped around how I go through life every day and how I go through my professional career every day. And so for me, that really is the most important one.
Wow. I want to dig into that a little bit, especially because you've touched on this dynamic, of course, you feel with respect to the communities you serve. And the Desai Foundation has done a lot of work around the world, served 5 million people to date, is present in over 2,500 communities, working to empower women, children, particularly in India. Can you speak a little bit specifically to communities and individuals you've served and some of the projects that you're working on today?
Oh, yes. This is my favorite thing to talk about. So first and foremost, the Desai Foundation empowers women and children through community programming to elevate health, livelihood, and menstrual equity. We focus on rural India. In the past, the Desai Foundation has done work in America, in New York and Morningside Heights that was specifically focused on livelihood and ready for work preparation. But over the last year, we've actually decided to focus on India, which is what we are excellent at. Again, that focus of making sure that you're staying core to who you are and what you're good at. We work in these three verticals because we know that in order to cultivate dignity for you to dream beyond your circumstances, there are some foundational blocks that you require in order to live that type of life. One being around health, having access to the screening, the education, the medicines, et cetera, that you need around your health is foundational block number one. Two is the dignity to and ability to work and be able to provide for yourself and for your families. And so those are the two foundational blocks. We added menstrual equity about 10 years into the Desai Foundation because we were noticing this massive gap while we were working in health and livelihood where women meet and we're like, well, where are the women in school? Where are the women in the workplace? And we were recognizing how many different aspects of health, livelihood, and dignity were connected to menstrual equity. And so we added that on as the triangle of health, livelihood, and menstrual equity. And that is the areas of focus. I'll tell you two stories that always come to mind when I think about the women we've served. There is a woman, and we always change the names of the women that we serve. So I'm going to call her Hina. Hina grew up in a very, very small village in Maharashtra. She grew up as pretty much the only woman in her house. So she was mostly focused on house, taking care of her brothers, taking care of her father and her grandmother. And she ended up finding herself just kind of lost a little bit. And they were having some financial issues at home. So she was feeling a little lost and she really wanted to find a way to contribute and connect. What a lot of people forget here, and especially the States, is that in a village setting, a woman is going from her father's house to her husband's house and usually changing villages. So not able to bring her friends with her. And then is suddenly surrounded by her husband's ecosystem. And so creating those personal friendships is not an opportunity that they often have. And so she joins our beautician classes. It's a 3-month rigorous program where we teach women all the things of cosmetology, how to do bridal things, how to wrap saris, how to do all that kind of stuff. We also teach them a 1.5 week entrepreneurship training so that they know how to do it on their own, because we know that they're not going to be able to necessarily go work at a beauty shop around the corner because they don't have that many beauty shops around the corner. So Hina takes this course. I visit her about 6 months later, and she says to me, you are not teaching enough women this program. And I said, oh, okay, what do you mean? And she's like, I have so much business that I've been recruiting from your program and you're not training them fast enough. And I've never been so happy to receive criticism in my life. And I was like, okay, well, what do you propose that we do about it? And she's like, well, I can teach them. And I said, great. So we handed her the entire course book. She'd already been through it herself. And we were like, go ahead, teach more women. She is now the greatest pipeline of bringing women to this program, of recruiting them, providing them jobs. She runs a small little business now. She even has a physical shop. And she's the pride of her family now. And she has these deep friendships and these deep connections and a sense of community that she has been able to create. And that is exactly what we do at the Desai Foundation. Yes, it's about teaching a skill so they can put money in her pocket, but it's about more than that. It's about how we create a sense of community, dignity, and faith in these ecosystems. And so that is an example of one of the women that we serve. I'll tell you another example of a woman we serve that actually just heard this story. It's a new one. So we had a program called Heroes for Humanity that launched during the pandemic. This program basically trained and deployed 500 local villagers with skills that they needed to help aid during the pandemic. So whether it was doing COVID tests or distributing food or masks or whatever. And our heroes, we actually hired in all 7 of the 8 states in which we work. We hired 500 of them and deployed them out. These heroes over the last 14 months have impacted nearly 3 million people with different screening and aspects of programming for the COVID pandemic. These programs have continued and we've simply shifted them to be our regular scheduled programs. And we have this one woman, we'll call her Smita. She was in a village in Orissa and really didn't, again, have that sense of community. And she joined our Asani sanitary napkin program where she was going out and originally she was distributing food, but then she started to distribute Asani sanitary napkins in these communities. And what's nice about the Asani sanitary napkin program is that we remove a lot of barriers for women to have access to pads. So even if they have the awareness, even if they can get over the stigmas, even if they have access to the education that they need and the funds that they need, oftentimes there's still this barrier of getting menstrual pads because you don't want to interact with the male shopkeeper, or you don't want to ask your husband or your uncle who controls the money to go get these pads for you. So there's still that barrier. So these Asani women go out into the village and distribute the pads door to door. And then they keep a commission of the pads. So it's a business for them as well. And so she became an Asani sanitary napkin sales agent. And one of the things that I love about her story is because she was going door to door, she actually got to know everyone in the community.
Wow.
And now she's not just serving as an Asani sanitary napkin worker. She is actually providing community connection, especially during a pandemic where like not everyone got to move around. So she was this social connector. And what that did was she's like, oh, you have no idea how differently my mother-in-law treats me.
Interesting.
Because now everyone knows her. She's not this hidden girl in the house, right? She is now this visible woman who people respect.
Yeah.
And so suddenly her sasu has to treat her better. It's almost as though now her treatment of her daughter-in-law is a true outward reflection of who she is. And so suddenly that changes the way her children see her. That changes the way her husband sees her. And that trickle effect of the impact is really the power of some of these programs and why we've designed them the way we are. And so these are just 2 of thousands and thousands of stories that we have of the incredible people that we serve.
What beautiful stories. Something that I really appreciate about what you just shared is that obviously there's this misconception around social impact work of taking a problem and throwing money at it or throwing resources at it. But what's so interesting about the 2 stories you shared is the motif of social connection that these women found. Sometimes when we're just thinking about the core issue, we forget all the other dynamics in play, like social dynamics in India that frankly are very different from what a lot of us experience here or anywhere else. Just speaks very highly to the work you're doing and is really, really amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, it's the social dynamics and also how we measure success. I think that a lot of us will give a check for $1,000 and say like, how many wells are you building? That's not the right question. right? The question should be, how many people are you impacting? And so I think it's a challenge for all of us to rethink when we are investing in the social sector to make sure that we're asking questions that respect the work and respect the people that we're serving. Because it's possible that the well was unnecessary, but what was necessary was smaller containers or potable water, or I don't know. There's like so many other layers to, and I'm just using a water example. We don't work in water, but it's just an easy example to showcase the difference.
Absolutely. You talked about how when you first joined this space, it didn't quite have the cachet that it does today, particularly in the South Asian community. Understandably, as our community has grown in size in the US and just gained more socioeconomic influence, we've become more socially minded, more impact driven. But we're also, as a community, not always the best at showing up for these causes, even when they pertain to our own communities. I'm curious what you've seen in terms of the evolution of the social sector in your time in this space broadly and within our community specifically.
Yes. It actually kind of goes back to that original theme that you were mentioning about social connection. I think that with the advent of social media and as social media has increased, I can see what the pocket of Gujaratis in Houston is doing versus the pocket of Punjabis in Massachusetts is doing, right? So suddenly we're able to see, whereas before, our core community over the last several years at the Desai Foundation have been the entrepreneurs in Massachusetts that we know, right? Because that's our little universe. So
where you're based.
That's where we're based. So originally that was core community, and that community still really does show up for us, which we are really grateful for. I think what I've seen is as our economic power has shifted, as our professional visibility has shifted, I think there has been a sense of pride and obligation to connect and give back, whether it's to the homeland or to the diaspora or even to the communities that we live in now, right? Because I think it's just as important to give locally as it is to give back to where you're from. And so I think it's been very exciting to watch the community grow and develop and mature in terms of their giving. Yes, we still don't give as much as the Jewish community or some of the other minority populations do, but we're getting there and we're learning and we're starting to grow. There is also undeniably a trust factor that we need to acknowledge.
Interesting.
Traditionally, within India, in country, nonprofits have not been trusted. And there is a great deal of fraud and also just not feeling like it's a good, comfortable investment. And it's why we are very public about this is how your money is being used. This is what we're doing with it, showing people the true impact of the work. And so some of that carries over to this generation, right? Oh, well, I'm not sure if I trust them. I don't know if I can give them that much money, et cetera, et cetera. And I deeply understand that because I still do see some of that fraud in India. But again, with that connection comes trust. And so I think that as we're able to connect as a diaspora and see, oh, okay, interesting, they're doing some work there in this community on this, let's collaborate. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the nonprofit industry is that we all see each other as competitors. Mm-hmm. We don't. We actually often collaborate. We're sharing work. We are sharing mistakes. I was just on a call with a bunch of other menstrual equity organizations saying like, hey, wait, don't do that. We already made that mistake for you. Let me explain to you how you could go a different way. And so we are really collaborating and working together to lift each other up. And so I think it's about celebrating the diaspora, celebrating the community, and celebrating the work. But then again, celebrating the people we serve. And I think that as long as you bring that connection always back to the people we serve, it's why we try to tell as many stories as possible. That has always been our MO, is let the people that are being impacted by the work tell the stories of the work.
Absolutely. I want to stay on this for a second because it's also very clear to me that in your work with the Desai Foundation, you've also been a driver of that connection within the diaspora community and encouraging people to give back, of course. And obviously what most notably comes to mind is your recent event, Diwali on the Hudson. But it seems like in joining this foundation and leading it and bringing in your creative insights from the advertising space, you've been innovative with respect to how you guys fundraise, lead generation, all these opportunities. I was wondering if you could speak to the Valley on the Hudson, speak to some of these interesting projects that you've tried to craft to innovate in terms of how this industry functions broadly.
Oh, that's so kind of you to frame it that way. It's very generous. I have to be honest, I think that some of it is ignorance, right? And naivete, right? Like when you come into a new industry, you're kind of like, let's do it this way. And then everyone in the industry is like, that's not how we do it. And I didn't have that many advisors in the nonprofit space telling me no. And so I was kind of like, let's give it a try. And so a lot of it was just experimentation and dumb luck. Another part of it was me constantly centering the people we serve and the work that we do. And because of that, I always wanted to come up with ways of how do we always make sure that at the core of what we're doing, we're centering the people we serve. And so for things like Diwali on the Hudson, 9 years ago, there weren't that many people hosting public Diwali parties. But before I get into our Diwali party, I do want to mention that there are a long lineage of people that made Diwali on the Hudson even possible, right? So there are people like Nishad Acharya who acknowledged Diwali at the White House for the first time during the Clinton administration, right? There are people like DJ Rekha who have been innovating and bringing to the forefront our music and our culture for 25 years.
Yeah.
There's a long lineage of amazing people that we have to know that we stand on the shoulders of in terms of building events like Diwali on the Hudson. And so 9 years ago, when we first hosted our event, we really didn't know if anyone was going to show up. I think that year, Diwali in Times Square also launched. It was the same year, if I'm correct. That was a little different because it was targeted towards a slightly different audience and it was a more shorter event. There was no fundraising component, etc. And so we were like, well, let's see. And the crazy part is we actually sold out 2 weeks before the event, which for a New York City event is just unheard of. And so we were like, oh, there's something here. And it's been so lovely to host the event year after year, bring together somewhere upwards of 300 people every year, be able to celebrate and showcase so many beautiful artists and fashion designers and dancers and really celebrate our vendors, our community, really trying to celebrate all the things we bring together. And so for me, it's just been a really lovely, beautiful thing to watch Diwali swell and grow and have so many different people participate in so many different ways. Because at the end of the day, it should be about the celebration of our culture. It should be about the connection and the joy and the inclusivity that Diwali is all about. And I can't wait to see where it goes from here.
Absolutely. Me neither. I want to talk a little bit and dig deeper into, as I said, your role with the Desai Foundation. Mm-hmm. You ascended to the role of president in 2017 and have been running the organization for a number of years. You said you guys focus on these 3 core pillars. What do you think are the issues that demand our attention right now?
It's interesting. If you had asked me this question 4 months ago, my answer would have been different. But given where we are right now, I do think that menstrual equity is the issue that concerns us the most. And the reason I say that is not just because of what's happening in India. It's because of what's happening globally and specifically what's happening here in the United States. 15 years ago, when we started working in menstrual equity, we did not believe that we were working in a politically charged industry. But right now, with the Dobbs decision and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, suddenly the security of my period and who has that information is actually an issue. And the fact that miscarriages and so many other things are being framed as a violation of the law. We have coaches in Florida requiring their athletes to report their periods, which I'm sure there's a HIPAA violation in there somewhere. These are not medical professionals. These are not people that understand why we get our periods, why we miss our periods, why our periods change, how a diet can increase our cramps, how a stress level can make us have a longer or shorter period, how there are a litany of other things that affect our menstrual health. And the fact that we are now defending it right here in the United States, we're still combating these stigmas in India. We are still combating these laws here in America. And it's really an issue that I believe unifies these 2 lands and I think affects so many other countries as well, that it's really amazing to watch us go backwards. And I also will say that during the pandemic in India, a lot of the work that we had done reversed. There's so much data that proves that the clocks really were turned back quite significantly on women's and girls' development in India. when it came to child marriage, because people were so poor that they were marrying off their kids. They just didn't have jobs or whatever. The percentage of girls that went back to school post-pandemic is quite drastically lower. There's so many things. And so for me, girls' rights, women's rights, people who identify as girls and women's rights, and both in America and in India is something that I think we can all come together to defend.
Absolutely. I love that. And I appreciate you highlighting the ways in which the past number of years have exacerbated some of these challenges. To that end, I would love to hear more about, we've spoken about sort of the innovative solutions you've brought to the space, how you've thought creatively about leading in the social sector. What are your biggest challenges in leading the Desai Foundation and just being a leader in the nonprofit space?
Yeah, well, there are lots of challenges. I think that being a leader is always difficult. You feel like everything kind of stops and ends with you. And I think that what I've tried to do is shift my mindset a little bit from being a leader to being a shepherd. I've tried really hard to think about the work as me shepherding the work rather than me leading the work. And I think I've been successful at that in some areas and not successful at that in other areas. I think from a programming perspective, I've been really successful in terms of shaping our programming on the ground because the people we serve are smarter than we are when it comes to what is going to help them succeed. So for me, It's been easier to make that transition on the shepherd side. I will admit I have struggled as a Zoom boss. I really rely on personal interaction. I need to see physical body cues. I need to see little things like, did my colleague, is she someone that normally dresses up today and today she wore her sweatpants to work? What does that tell me? Is there something happening in her personal life that I should ask her about? And I think I've missed some cues. And I think that I've missed some things that have unfortunately led to me losing some really great people at the Desai Foundation over the last couple of years. And for me, it's a learning curve that I'm still learning. I know that I've talked to a lot of other people in my position where they've thankfully agreed and said, oh yeah, this is so difficult having everyone remotely, especially if you don't have those physical interactions on a day-to-day basis. Because now my team lives all over the country. And so it's impossible for us to get together unless we have a Diwali on the Hudson or a Lotus Festival, in which case it brings us all together and we have those moments. So like right now, we're super cohesive as a team because we just spent 3 days together in person and working. But yeah, and I'm really looking forward to getting back to some interpersonal reaction. Like I'm not saying that it has to be full-time all the time, but some sort of a happy medium of a couple of days in person, a couple of days at home, for me is something I'm eager to return to, partially just because I need it. So that's one thing. The last bit I will mention is I also think the other challenge is the attention economy, right? It is really tricky to anticipate the kind of ebbs and flows of what people are talking about and how people are interested. I can tell you that during the peak of the pandemic in India, we had 3 months where the Desai Foundation was raising a lot of money and we were spending it immediately, quickly implementing our programming. And it was because a lot of really generous people mentioned us in the right rooms and talked about us on social media, etc. And the issue of what was happening in India was on the news every night for about 3 weeks. Maybe a month, but about 3 weeks. And then the second Russia invaded Ukraine, the entire news story just went away. And it was amazing to see the correlation between the donations and the news story. And we were still continuing to do the work, but suddenly the faucet had just shut off. And that was difficult for not just our organization, for all the organizations that were working in India.
Yeah.
And so that's hard just to like be kind of at the mercy of what people are talking about and how people give. So for us, building those long-term development relationships in terms of donors has been really, really critical. But then also anticipating and being able to take advantage of a moment so that you can serve as many people as possible. But that is a fine balance and something that you kind of always have to have one ear out for, which I struggle with sometimes because I get pretty tunnel vision. So it's hard sometimes to think in the moment as well as in the future.
Well, I think we can forgive you for not being able to predict the news cycle. I think something that has resonated with respect to what you're saying is I think it's really easy for people who don't work in this space to tap in when they want and tap out when they want. Versus for you, this is every day. Mm-hmm. And the people that you work with, this is every day. For the communities you serve, this is every day. This is an industry where people talk about burnout a lot because you're working on these grand issues that, as you said, affect people's livelihoods. How do you stay motivated and keep your head up, dealing with those dynamics, dealing with the fact that you're taking on problems that can't be solved overnight?
Yeah, I think my answer is going to be pretty cliche, but I think it's family, friends. My family is incredible. I love taking a time out and playing with my nephews. During the pandemic, I taught my nephew chess, and in a year, he was beating me. And this is when he was 6. So I think my friends and family have been an incredible support. I have just the best tribe of female friends here in New York and beyond that push me, that keep me honest, that I feel really comfortable being super vulnerable with. I called somebody 3 days ago and said, hey, I screwed up. Can you help me figure out what to do from here? And being able to say, this is what I need. So that has been incredible. I think what keeps me motivated is the people I serve. I also think what keeps me motivated is the small wins, not the big ones. So the big ones are great. Don't get me wrong. Being on stage at CGI, big win, wonderful. But the wins that for me are really powerful are when I get a phone call that says, oh my gosh, we re-engineered the help desk and it's totally working. And now we're getting people Aadhaar cards and PAN cards left and right. And here is how we've been able to accomplish that. Especially when we're experimenting, that really gets me going. If we've experimented and we've cracked the nut, like, oof, that really motivates me. And then also I sing. It's an outlet that for me really connects me with God. And I think that finding that creative vibrational outlet for you, whether that's running, whether that's whatever the case may be, but I try to sing at minimum 3 times a week. I sing with the Resistance Revival Chorus. It's an incredible group of beautiful people that identify as females that have really changed my entire, I know this is going to sound dramatic, but I feel like they've completely changed my vibrational energy. And it's so lovely to have this outlet that I can do anywhere at any time and feel connected to God.
I love that.
And then I think the last thing is therapy. I love my therapist. She has helped me really center and ground myself in my whys and why I'm doing things and reminding myself always my values, my whys. And I think we can get so caught up, especially in today's day and age with why am I not there? And why am I not getting credit for this? And why am I not doing this? It's like, doesn't matter. All that's nice. Just why? Why are you doing this? And that has been really, really wonderful. Also, just a really quick asterisk on therapy. Those of us of color should consider a therapist of color. I think that it really helps to have that mirrored experience. I think for me, it's been completely game changing. And the amount of nuance that she understands in my life when it comes to family, when it comes to work, when it comes to everything, it's been a game changer for me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I don't think it's a conversation we have often enough. And I think it's important that people understand that trailblazers, leaders across industry, also rely on family, friends, therapy, a lot of the things that are tools for everyone. The last question I have for you today is, when you stepped into this role, you were stepping into your father's shoes and really building upon his work. How have you thought about that, as well as what your vision is for the Desai Foundation for the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you want to take this organization?
Yeah, stepping into my father's shoes was very difficult. I think what was helpful was that we were side by side for many years. Of the last 6 years, I think we were kind of side by side for 4 of them. And we talk a lot about our why, and we talk a lot about our vision for the future. And so we luckily have been 75% aligned, which is great. And then those 25% of things, it's actually awesome because you get to have tussles with someone that you know loves you, that is either intellectually superior or equal to you. My dad is intellectually superior to me. And it actually becomes this beautiful practice and exercise where you get to really push each other, you get to grow, and makes the work so much better. It is better because we disagree on a lot of stuff. It is better because there's a thread that we are constantly revisiting and going back to. I'll give you a real example of that. The Desai Foundation was founded doing work both in the United States and in India. That was his original vision. since I have taken over and since I really got to examine the work that we did in the US, I wasn't as satisfied with it. I felt like it lacked a lot. I felt like that was still operating in our old model as a foundation. We weren't as involved in those programs. I didn't like that they were not completely married up with our 3 verticals. And so I was really struggling with them. And every year I would bring up, can we reevaluate if we work in the United States? And board meeting after board meeting, I'd be shut down. And it wasn't until 2 years ago when we had a board meeting and finally someone said, we should really think about that. And I was like, thank you. And so just at the last board meeting, we had officially decided that we are no longer going to work in the US. Now, not every battle takes 5 years, but the idea is that sometimes it can, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And at least you're kind of working with someone that you love and trust. I'm never going to be able to measure up to my father in terms of his operational mind, the way that he thinks about structure, about finance. But I bring a lot of other things to the table, right? I bring a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation and a lot of other things. So I think it's just being able to be honest with each other and honest with yourself and say, actually, like, I'm better at this than you are. So why don't you let me take this one? And we've been able to do that. And so it's been the greatest honor of my life. And as he kind of winds down his tenure this year and next, I will be fully taking the reins. And I've been basically running it myself, but he is still my CFO and a couple other things. And so I feel really, really blessed to have been in this position. And I think that our vision for the future is about the people we serve. Last year, we grew a lot. We added 4 new states. I hope not to grow that quickly moving forward. So maybe 1 more state next year to bring us to 9. But we want to deepen our programs. We want to further expand our reach in terms of health and livelihood. We want our menstrual equity program to be nationwide and maybe even global. We want our programming to come to you. So if there is a community that you work with in India that could benefit from our programs, let us know. There might be a way for us to come to your community and implement those programs. So our vision is really to continue to serve the people we do, to deepen and expand our impact, and also to share our knowledge with other people that are trying to change the world. We want to make sure that people don't make the same mistakes that we did, right? But learn from us. And it's why I try to get up on stage and talk a lot about the work. It's not because I care about being on stage. It's because if we don't share our information, especially in this industry, what are we doing?
Yeah.
We really need to be sharing our information and growing together.
Yeah. Well, Megha, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story. I mean, your passion for the work. And as you've said, the communities you serve is just outstanding and so resonant. And it's amazing to hear about your journey because it's so unique. And especially to you talking about your father. I come from a strong family business dynamic. And it's just interesting. A lot of what you said really resonates. So thank you.
Thank you so, so much. I so appreciate your time, Simi. And I love the work that you do at Trailblazers.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you want to get new episodes straight to your inbox, subscribe to our newsletter at southasiantrailblazers.com and follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.